The pie plate burned through my oven mitt for a second, but I didn't drop it. Lauren stood in my kitchen doorway, smiling like she was doing me a favor, and told me I had until Christmas to leave my own house. My name is Eleanor Grace Whitaker. I am 71, and on Thanksgiving 2023, my daughter-in-law decided 128 Cedar Ridge Lane belonged to her. Michael never said a word. That was the part I kept hearing after dinner ended. Before I go any further, I'm curious where you're listening from tonight. Stories like this travel farther than we ever expect, especially the ones about family. If you've ever sat at a table where the silence felt heavier than the words, you probably understand this feeling already. And if this kind of story speaks to you, you can tap like and subscribe so you can stay with me through everything that happened after that night. I married Edward Whitaker in June of 1980, on a Saturday so hot the church fans felt useless. My dress stuck to the backs of my knees, and Edward kept smiling at me like none of it mattered. He looked at me the way a man looks when he has already decided what the rest of his life is going to be. Steady, certain, calm in a way that made other people calmer too. 2 years later, in 1982, we moved into 128 Cedar Ridge Lane. The paint in the front bedroom was still drying when I came home from the hospital with Michael wrapped in a yellow blanket. The house was not grand. It was a brick colonial with squeaky upstairs floors, a narrow staircase, and a backyard that sloped more than it should have. But to us it felt like a rival. The kitchen had a wide window over the sink, and every morning the light came in soft and gold across the counters. Michael grew up in that house the way children used to grow up before everybody started rushing. We marked his height on the pantry trim every birthday. He learned to ride a bike on our street, wobbling past the Turner family's mailbox while Edward jogged beside him with one hand hovering over the seat. At night, after dinner, Edward would sit at the table with the checkbook open and a pencil in his fingers. Numbers seemed to relax him. He liked order. He liked things lined up and squared to the edge of the table. If I asked about a bill or tax form, he would smile and say, "I'll take care of the numbers. Ellie?" And he did. That became the shape of our marriage. I handled the life you could touch. Meals, school forms, doctor appointments, Christmas shopping, church flowers, casseroles for funerals, birthday cakes with hand-piped frosting. Edward handled the parts that came in envelopes, mortgage statements, investments, insurance. He never hid anything from me. It was simply division of labor. I knew where the checkbook lived. I knew which file drawer held the house papers. I just never felt the need to study any of it because Edward never gave me a reason to worry. When Michael was 10, he once asked me why Dad always sat at the table with so many papers spread around him. "Because that's how he loves us," I said. I remember Edward looking up at me over the rims of his glasses and laughing softly. But it was true. Edward protected people with preparation. He made lists. He read the fine print. He noticed things before they became problems. It was not romantic in the way movies like romance. It was steadier than that. The years moved quickly. Michael became a teenager with long limbs and a deeper voice and the talent, like most boys, for leaving damp towels everywhere except the hamper. Edward got quieter with age, not colder, just more thoughtful. Lauren entered our lives much later, when Michael was already a man and no longer needed me in the ordinary ways. I remember the first dinner she came to at Cedar Ridge Lane. She brought a bottle of wine and wore a white sweater that looked too expensive to sit comfortably in my dining room. She was pretty in a polished kind of way. Not warm. Exactly. Finished. Everything about her looked selected. She complimented the house, but not the way people do when they actually mean it, she said. "This place has so much potential." That word stayed with me the same way a small stone stays in your shoe. You keep walking. It does not stop you. It just keeps reminding you something is there. After Michael married her, I noticed Lauren asked odd questions. Not personal questions. Structural ones. How old was the roof? When had we refinished the floors? Had the neighborhood appreciated much? She said these things while smiling over coffee, as if she were just making conversation. Edward would answer lightly, but afterward I'd catch him looking at her with that quiet accountant's gaze of his. He never said much to me directly. That was not his way. But sometimes, late at night, He stayed longer in his study with the door shut. I could hear file drawers opening, paper sliding across paper. Once, when I brought him tea, he covered one document with another before I reached the desk. He was arranging something, securing it, tightening the bolts where I could not yet see the danger. Then came the illness. Edward was diagnosed a little over a year before he died. Serious, fast-moving. The kind of diagnosis that turns all the clocks in a house louder overnight. Suddenly there were pill bottles on the bathroom shelf. Specialist appointments written in blue ink on the kitchen calendar. Casseroles arriving from women at church who would not meet my eyes for too long. Edward lost weight first, then color. But not his mind. Even when he was tired enough to fall asleep in his chair before the evening news. He still asked where the mail was. He still wanted the monthly statements. He still wanted his study kept exactly the same. Toward the end, he spent more time with the study door closed. Not all day, just enough to make me notice. When I asked what he was doing, he would say, tidying things up. One afternoon, not long before he died, he called me into the room. The late sun was coming through the blinds in thin gold bars across the desk. His glasses were folded beside an open drawer. He looked tired, but very clear. If anything ever feels off after I'm gone, he said. Don't panic, just open the box. What box? The metal one in the bottom drawer. I remember frowning at him. Edward, why are you talking like that? Because I'm practical, he said. Then he reached for my hand. And because people show themselves when they think a widow is frightened. I told him not to talk that way. I was angry, frightened too. Though I would not have admitted it aloud, he squeezed my hand once, gently, and let the subject go. I left the tea on his desk and walked out before he could see me cry. He died 14 months ago in our bedroom, just after dawn, with the curtains still half closed and the house quieter than I had ever heard it. Since then, I have lived alone at Cedar Ridge Lane for the first time in 41 years, alone with the study door closed and the metal box still in the bottom drawer, waiting, by Thanksgiving 2023. I had learned the sound of every room without him, and I had started to understand that Lauren had learned something too by then. Lauren started calling the Monday after Thanksgiving, always around 10, always brisk, like she was checking on a delayed package. Ellie, have you made progress? Not hello. Not how are you? Progress. The first time. I stood at the sink peeling potatoes for soup and looked out at the backyard while she talked. The grass was silver with frost. I've started sorting, I said. You'll need to move faster, she replied. Christmas is not that far away, and Michael and I need time to make decisions before the spring market. The spring market. She said it as if my home had already stopped being a home and become a strategy. When I hung up, I dried my hands, walked into Edward's study, and opened the bottom drawer. The box was heavier than I expected. Inside were folders labeled in his neat block handwriting: house, accounts, properties, legal. The sight of it made my throat tighten, even dead. He was still tidying things up for me. I read only the first page that morning. The deed to Cedar Ridge Lane sat in a plastic sleeve, and my name was there beside his. No mortgage. Paid in full years ago. Lauren called again the next day. I've been looking at care communities, she said. There's a lovely place about 15 minutes away. Nice grounds. Safe. People your age. People your age. She was 30-something and used the phrase the way one might discuss a shipment of fruit. I stood in the hall with the cordless phone tucked against my shoulder and stared at the family photographs on the wall. Michael in Little League. Michael at graduation. Michael with Lauren at their engagement dinner. I'm not ready to discuss that, I said. A pause. Then a small laugh. Ellie, this really isn't about what you're ready for. It's about what makes sense. That was the first time I felt something shift inside me. Grief had kept me soft for months. Her certainty sharpened me. By Friday, she arrived unannounced. I heard her heels on the front walk before the bell. When I opened the door, she was already holding a tape measure and a leather notebook. She wore a camel coat and sunglasses even though the sky was gray. I won't stay long, she said, brushing past me. I just need room dimensions. Room dimensions for what? For furniture. She glanced around the living room. This sofa has to go, obviously. And if we open that wall into the kitchen, The whole first floor will feel twice as large. There is a kind of pain that comes as erasure. She walked through my house naming things as if they were already debris. The wallpaper in the downstairs bath. The mantel Edward refinished by hand one winter. The glass front cabinet where my mother's china still sat. "We'll probably gut this bathroom," she said, scribbling a note, "and heated floors would help resale." Resale? I stayed calm enough to ask. "You're planning renovations before discussing any of this with me." She gave me a quick, surprised look. "Ellie, these are just practical conversations. You don't want to be burdened by this place anymore." Burdened? That word landed harder than the others. She did not see me as a person with attachments and history. She saw me as clutter standing in the way of better square footage. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the box again. This time, I read further. There were property records for houses I had never heard of, rental agreements, banking documents, statements thick with numbers that meant nothing at first, and then suddenly meant everything. Edward had not just protected the house. He had built an entire wall around me. The next Monday, I took the folder labeled Legal Downtown to David Langford's office. His receptionist led me into a conference room with windows overlooking Brookhaven's main square. David stood when I entered. He greeted me with the gentle formality of a man who had already read the whole story. He listened while I described Thanksgiving. Lauren's deadline. Her plan to move me before Christmas. The talk of realtors and value and appropriate living. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, "Mrs. Whitaker, your daughter-in-law has no legal right to remove you from that house." The sentence did something to me physically. My shoulders dropped. Air moved deeper into my lungs. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. "Your husband arranged everything very carefully. Cedar Ridge Lane passes to you entirely. After you. The property goes according to conditions he set. Until then, no one can force a sale. No one can move in. No one can speak for you. No one can speak for me," I repeated. He nodded once. "Exactly." I went from his office to Brookhaven Community Bank. Kevin Park met me in a side office that smelled faintly of printer toner and coffee. He remembered Edward, then placed a stack of statements in front of me and waited while I read. I had expected stability. I had not expected scale. Accounts in my name. Investment balances. Transfers. Income deposits from Whitaker Property Services. By the time I reached the final page, my hands were cold. Not with fear. With astonishment. That afternoon, I drove to the office of Whitaker Property Services, where Angela Kim welcomed me. She showed me records for the rentals Edward had purchased and managed under my name. Houses, duplexes, long-term tenants, reliable income. All of it real. All of it already mine. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Lauren. "Ellie, I've booked movers for the 15th, she said. "Please don't make this ugly. Michael is stressed enough." That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as misunderstanding and started seeing it for what it was. Not concern, not planning. An attempted takeover dressed up as family duty, and once I could name it, I could fight it. By Christmas night, my dining room looked the way it always had. Candles in silver holders, my mother's china catching light, the good tablecloth ironed smooth. But nothing in that room felt ordinary. Lauren sat halfway down the table in a cream dress, smiling like she had won. Michael kept adjusting his napkin. Judith and Frank were on my right. Robert and Carol were on my left. The Turners sat near the window. Everyone felt it. Something was waiting. David Langford arrived just after I cleared the dinner plates. Lauren looked up first. "Why is he here?" I stayed standing at the head of the table. "Because you wanted to discuss the house?" Nobody moved. The hall clock ticked loud enough to sound rude. David set his briefcase on the sideboard and took the empty chair near the end of the table. He opened it, removed a folder, then another, and laid them side by side. Michael swallowed. "Mom, what is this?" I said. "Is the conversation we should have had after Thanksgiving." Lauren laughed once. "Ellie, if this is about hurt feelings, we can talk privately." "No," I said. "We can't." I nodded to David. He opened the first folder. "I represent the late Edward Whitaker's estate," he said. "And I also represent Mrs. Eleanor Grace Whitaker in all matters concerning 128 Cedar Ridge Lane." Lauren folded her arms. "Fine. Then explain to her that Michael is her only child. David slid one document toward Michael. This is the deed. The property passed in full to Mrs. Whitaker upon her husband's death. She is the sole legal owner. Michael stared at the page. Lauren kept looking at me. That's temporary, she said. Obviously. David lifted a second document. No, it isn't. He turned another page. Mrs. Whitaker has exclusive right to occupy, manage, retain, or sell the house. No one else may remove her, list the property, authorize renovations, or interfere with possession. Lauren's face changed in stages. Disbelief, offense, fear. That can't be right, she said. Michael inherits everything. David turned one more page. After Mrs. Whitaker, the property transfers according to terms set by Edward Whitaker. Until then, neither Michael nor his spouse has any claim of use or control. Michael looked up at me, pale. You knew I found out after Thanksgiving, I said. After your wife told me to be out by Christmas. The room went silent. Lauren leaned forward. I was trying to help you. I picked up my phone. Were you? I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, bright and certain. I've booked movers for the 15th. Please don't make this ugly. I played the next one. This sofa has to go. If we open that wall into the kitchen, the whole first floor will feel twice as large. Then another. It's not about what you're ready for. It's about what makes sense. Lauren's mouth fell open. You recorded me. Yes, I said. David opened the second folder. These recordings, along with witness statements and documented attempts to schedule movers without consent, establish a pattern of coercion regarding Mrs. Whitaker's residence. Michael pushed back from the table an inch, then stopped. Lauren, he whispered. She turned on him. Don't. But the room had already changed. Everyone could feel it. I touched the third folder myself. This part matters too. I slid the top page toward the center of the table. Asset summaries, account balances, property income. You told me I could not afford this house, I said. My total financial position is approximately $13.4 million. The rentals Edward purchased are in my name. The investments are in my name. The accounts are in my name. I do not need assisted living. I do not need your help. And I certainly do not need permission to remain in my own home. Judith let out a breath that sounded like laughter. Robert stared at Lauren with disgust. Lauren's lipstick had gone crooked at one corner. You let me believe you had nothing. No, I said quietly. You decided that on your own. Then I took my dessert fork, cut a clean piece of pie, and finally sat down in my own chair. After David Langford closed his briefcase, nobody reached for the pie. Lauren sat rigid, both hands flat on the tablecloth, as if she could hold herself together by force. Michael looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not younger, smaller. Like the room had finally shown him his own shape. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask for apologies. I simply said, "You should go now." Lauren stood first. Her chair scraped hard across the floor. "This is insane," she said. But the words had no weight left in them. She looked at Michael, waiting for him to take her side, to rescue her, to turn me back into the old widow she had imagined. He didn't. That was the only real sound in the room. Not the clock, not the china, not Judith clearing her throat. Just Michael, saying nothing. Lauren grabbed her coat from the back of her chair and walked toward the front hall too quickly. Like staying another second would burn her. Michael rose more slowly. He looked at me once, then away. "Mom," he said. I held his gaze this time. "Not tonight." He nodded. The shame in his face was quiet and raw. Then he followed his wife out into the cold. The front door closed. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Judith reached across the table and touched my wrist. "Ellie," she whispered. I covered her hand with mine and smiled, but it felt different than it had on Thanksgiving. Back then, I had smiled to survive the moment. Now I smiled because I had made it through. David stayed long enough to leave copies of everything with me. The deed, the asset summaries, the transcripts of Lauren's calls. Paper can be a strange comfort. Heavy, final, honest. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the house had gone still, I placed those papers back in Edward's study. They thought I was a widow waiting to be managed. What they handed me instead was proof. And proof, I was learning, could be warmer than revenge. If you made it all the way here with me, Thank you for staying. Stories like this linger long after the plates are cleared and the front door closes. I'd really love to know where you're listening from tonight. And I'm curious what you would have done in my place. Would you have exposed the truth at that table? Or walked away much sooner if this kind of family drama speaks to you? You can subscribe and stay with the channel for more stories about dignity, betrayal, and the quiet moments that change everything. Some endings are loud. Mine wasn't. Mine sounded like a door closing, a house settling into silence, and one woman finally sitting in her own chair without asking anyone's permission. Michael still hasn't answered every question I have, and maybe that's what stays with me most. Not what Lauren tried to take, but what my son was willing to believe.